I built the same web application on SvelteKit, Remix, and Next. So here are the top 10 differences that I found while developing the application. I have on port 3000 the Next.js edition, on port 3001 the Remix one, and 3002 the SvelteKit one. So starting with the server versus client separation. On Next, you have this, on the app router, you have this way of creating routes. For example, let's go to my marketing group, and here I have this forms page. Next, it requires you to create a page. So this can either be an async function, meaning a server component, or you can make it a client component by removing this and put use client at the top. But if you want to use, for example, use effect, use state, or other client things, you need to create a server component on the page, meaning an async component. And here you can load data and export async function, generate meta tags, I guess. And these can return a title, sample. And if I go to that page, forms, I should have generate meta tags, metadata, I guess. Yeah, metadata. So you can see that on this server component, I'm able to server render the SEO title, and then I load some data. And no, this is the action, but I could load database data, like for example, getting the users from the database, user get all, and then do something with this. I'm gonna refresh, so I have on the server component those users, but on the component I need to mark that as use client. So here I can use things like use action state, and this use action state basically gives me the action data result, the action is itself, and the pending status. So this is Next.js of dealing with server versus client. Now for Remix, let's go to the same example. I have this forms page. So here, the great thing about Remix and is that you have what I call full stack routes. So here you have the action, and you could have a loader that it's an async. And here I'm gonna return just, for example, name Alex, and I'm gonna use that data on my default function here, but I need to catch that with a use typed loader data, and I'm gonna type the type right there, and I'm gonna put the name at the top of the page. So I'm gonna go to the Remix route and go to forms. You can see my name here. So the difference between Next and Remix in that way is that Remix allows you to have client and server functions on the same page. Now on SvelteKit, let's I don't think I have the forms page yet, but I have other ones like newsletter page. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the privacy and policy, because that's pretty simple. So I'm gonna go to privacy policy. Here, I don't need server calls, so this is basically what I need. The page, the plus page that spelled is all the component that I need. But if I want to grab metadata, meta tags from the server, I can export this export let data, and you can see that it's automatically typed because it's co-located with the server. So the server nomenclature, it's plus page.server.ts, and here it's an you need to export a load function, and you can see that I'm not typing anything. It knows that it returns this meta tags, and on the client component, I'm able to export that data and use that. So if I'm gonna do the same thing like name Alex, you can see that if I want to render that on the client component, I have that data, that name. And let's see, here it is. So that's for the server versus client separation. Now let's move on to form actions. On Next.js, I really liked the way that they built with the React 15 use action state. And I'm actually gonna use the same page forms. So going back to that, as you know, I have the server component here, and here I defined the async function because I'm gonna be touching database calls and all that. So here we can have again the users. And where is this marketing forms that I'm exporting? On the client component. So on the client component, I'm grabbing the use action state where I pass the action itself and initial state, and I'm retrieving the action data, and you can see here it's success or null, and the action itself and the pending status. So this action needs to be on the form tag or the element, HTML element, and the action needs to be passed on here. So what if we want the pending status? Let's see. We can do something like this: if pending, submitting, otherwise submit. So I'm gonna go back to my action, and I'm gonna wait for 3 seconds. So this is a fake await. So whenever I submit this, you can see that 1, 2, 3 seconds, and it will give me the action data, and I can render that. So what if this is the default form submission, but what if I want to call this action on another button that is not on a form? This is useful for example, things like the local selector. You can see that on the local selector, well, the local selector, it's using the library itself. So maybe the dark mode toggle. No, this is also using the HTML element. But let's say that on the dark mode selector, I want to call this one right here, the one that makes the application dark, because it calls an action. The action is called action toggle scheme, and this action, you can see that it receives a form data, and it can receive a previous state. So if oh no, this needs to be grabbed inside an action like this: action data, action, and then pending, and then use action state and use the name of the action that you are exporting. So here you now need to do this previous state and the form data. So I'm gonna save that, and let's see if it's still working. So it is. But what if I want to use the action or call the action outside of the form? Let's say of this type button, it's not gonna be a submit because I'm gonna call it manually. I can do this. Create a new form data, set manually the well, yeah, let's receive the name, and I'm gonna put my name here, and I'm gonna call the action by passing down the form. So let's see if this button, where it is. I guess I need to put a name here, custom button. So you can see that it still works, and we can log on the action the name that I'm passing on the form. Name. So let's try again, custom button, and you can see name Alex. So on Next.js, it's really easy to go outside of the default form submissions with the form element. Now on Remix, what if I want to get out of the default action? Because you can see that I'm using the form class, or yeah, what is this type from Remix, but this triggers with the default submit button. But what if I want to do the same thing that I did with Next? Let's do that on the dark mode toggle as well, and you can see here that I'm calling submit in order to do that. So this is not actually grabbed inside the form like I did on Next. So this is the example that I was going to tell you. So I have this on click function that creates the form data and submits the form. So you can see that it's using use submit, and it receives the form and then the method. And if the action is on another route that is not the default or the current route, you need to specify the action. And since dark mode toggle, or maybe the action, it's called toggle scheme, it's on the root, I need to specify that here. But if it was, I don't know, on the newsletter, I need to pass that location. And yeah, it's the same thing that you do with Next. But here, the downside is that you don't have the action typed. So you need to manually define the, well, if you want to receive the result, you need to create an action property from action typed action data, and you need to know what type it's going to return and do something with this. Like I'm going to grab this button and put the action result here, stringified. The port 3001, so dark mode. Where's my changes? Action data here. Okay, so maybe the submission is not actually returning anything. So let me go to root and find that toggle scheme. Okay, so it's because I'm redirecting. So this is not the greatest example. It's not returning an actual result because it's redirecting. You can see that I'm recreating the user session with the new scheme and redirecting with that set cookie manually. But the point is that you can construct the manual form data, and you can call it by using submit, or you can use also fetcher, which is more convenient. And instead of using useSubmit, you can use typed fetcher, and this will have the action data type. So you don't no longer need the action data on a separate property. So you can react to that fetcher data. Let's take a look. Well, of course, we don't have anything, but we can render the whole fetcher. You can see that for a few seconds, it's doing something like state, it's submitting. I'm going to put submitting, otherwise submit. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did with Next, which is waiting a few seconds. Wait for 3 seconds. So if I click here, you can see that it's submitting and I'm using fetcher. So what's the SvelteKit way? On SvelteKit, it's really different than Next and Remix. Let me show you. What will be the greatest example? Maybe the login method is great. So here we have the default form element, and this needs the method post. And I'm using this use enhance that comes from SvelteKit kit or SvelteKit. And on this function, I'm defining the 3 states that I'm used to on Next and Remix. I mean, a pending status, an action data object, and an onSubmit where I can override the form data element or cancel even the form submission for validation. But this is the overall structure for form submissions. You can see that initially I set the pending status to true, and this is the function that runs after the submission is done. And here I check whether the action result is of type success, failure, or error. And at the end, I need to apply the action because by default, SvelteKit doesn't redirect you to anything if it's, for example, a redirect response. So you need to apply that action. Like, let me show you what happens if I uncomment this and go to the login and put an invalid password here, invalid credentials. But what if I put a valid user? Invalid credentials. Did I change the? I think I changed the password. Or maybe I need to uncomment this apply action. Yeah, that was my point. I'm rendering an error with invalid credentials, so bots doesn't know that they're failing at a successful successfully found email. But you can see that if you don't use apply actions, it will not do anything. And this is just because I want to grab the action data and the pending status on my own way. But this is using the default form submission, which is the HTML form element. What if you want to manually call an action like we did on dark mode toggle on Next and Remix? And here I have the example on the dark mode toggle itself. I'm gonna go back, and this, it's not a form element. What I'm doing is creating a form data object. I'm constructing the form, for example, name Alex SvelteKit, and I'm calling this action, and this action, it's telling that it's on the root page, meaning on the layout server, and here, or on the page server, where is it? Layout. Let me manually find that. Toggle scheme is on the page server. That it's inside the marketing group because it's the landing page. So you can see that here on the landing page, I'm exporting the toggle scheme function, and here I can grab the name and log it. So you can see that on SvelteKit, you can also go outside of the default form elements. So let me click toggle and see the name. And yeah, let's do the default form submission. I'm gonna go to logout page, and here I'm gonna go to the action that is calling the default form submission, which is from the form element. And where is this action? Well, if the action is somewhere else, you need to specify the root of the action. For example, let's say that it's on register. It shouldn't be here, but what if this happens? I get an internal error because this action needs to be cached inside where you're calling this login form. And you can see that this login form is only called on this login page. So on the co-located server, co-located file that it's a server, I need to have that actions. And if you're not naming the action, it's gonna go on the default one. But if you want to call a specific action, for example, login, I'm gonna do the same thing. Login to, and I'm gonna remove the default action just so you see what happens if I run this. It's not found because there's no login default action. But if I specify that on this form, I'm gonna use this action that it's on login, and I guess it's on the login route, but the action is login. Let me see if that's the correct way. Okay, so we need to add this and then the action name. Invalid credentials. Let me see with the correct one. Yeah. So you can see that it's on the login page and the action name, it's defined this way. So I really like also how SvelteKit gives you full control on the responses. But let's move on to the next topic, which is state management. So I don't really like to use a state management library, although they are great, like Redux, for example, or Substand. What was it called? I don't remember because I haven't actually used them more than for simple applications. But since this boilerplate is for full stack SaaS applications, I need a global state for multiple things. For example, on the Next.js edition, I have this dev route, and I have a root data that I want to use on all the application. You can see that I need the meta tags, so I don't need to create a meta tags object on every page. I'm gonna go to the default one, which comes from the root data. And here I need to know if I have a user logged in and the default theme, the locale, and other things. So what's the Next.js way of managing context? The way I did it is I have this root data layout. that this is a client component because I want to use, for example, path name, the current path name, or other things like a use effect that triggers the crisp bubble button for chat. And here I have the HTML and I have this root data context provider. And here I pass down the root data that comes from the server component that is on the layout itself, the layout of the whole application, because remember, this is the root data. And the root data needs to be as minimal as possible, of course. So this should be inside a cache. So it's no problem running on every page loader and action. And you can see that I'm grabbing inside this root data context provider. And I'm using the default create context and use context from React. And in order to use this, I create this use root data that grabs that context. And if the context doesn't exist, it means it's not being run on, inside the layout. But this shouldn't be the case because I put the layout as the shell of the whole application. But this is not the only context that I have. I have three main contexts: the root data, and the admin data layout or context, and the app data layout. The admin data layout means the /admin, and I want to do some other things different than on the client or customer portal. But this is the same way. You can see that I'm passing down the data on this provider, and this admin data layout, it's called on the layout on the for the admin group, which is on this route group, which is admin. And here we have the layout and more routes, like for example, admin accounts page. So this admin accounts page, it's gonna be able to use this admin data. Let me show you. So admin data.user, admin data.user. So, but I'm gonna put the email, and I'm gonna go to the admin route, accounts, users, and it's login. Oh, but this is not an admin user. I'm gonna log out and go back as an admin. Okay, so here we have the admin data.user. And whenever the admin data changes, or whenever you call an action or refresh the page, it's always gonna refresh this data. So we're always gonna have this admin data on every admin page. So this is the Next.js way. Now the Remix way, I prefer it much more because you don't need to grab things inside use context or creating custom context, because you can see that I have this use root data that it's called on the root. This is basically the layout on Next, on the root, which is the wrapping of the whole application. And on my loader, I load the root data and I pass down to all the application calls. And whenever I want to use that root data, I use these use matches. Use matches is from Remix, and it finds the data that it's being loaded on the current page or a previous page, because the pages are loaded in parallel. So since the root data comes from that root page, it's gonna grab it from here. But for the use admin data, I do the same thing, and I find the path that it's called routes/admin. So if that path is included inside a child of that route, like admin/accounts, it's gonna find that admin data and it's gonna return a valid admin data. But if I call, for example, let me show you accounts index, on the index page here, let me show you. I'm gonna go to admin accounts and log in as the admin user. Where is it? Here on accounts. Here, if I want to use an invalid context, for example, const app data, this is gonna be invalid because I'm not currently inside an app. But if I go to the application, I can go to the dashboard of that tenant and do the same thing. And I'm actually using use app data here. you can see app data, user email here. So there are different contexts, and on Remix, you don't need to create in manual states. It comes from the URL, it comes from the parent routes. Now for SvelteKit, I needed to do something similar to Next. You can see that use root data does something similar that basically gets the context. But the difference between Next and SvelteKit is that, let me show you root data context. On SvelteKit, I set the context, but I need to make this writable because I want to react to whatever changes from the root data. For example, the theme scheme, which is the dark mode. So I need to manually react to the data that comes from the one that is calling, in this case, root data context. You can see that it's being called on the layout similar to Next.js. And this is wrapping down the root data, and do the same thing for admin layout. So I pass down the admin data context that you can see here that this data has the admin data DTO. And that's basically it. I mean, the three of them are great, but I prefer much more the Remix way because it doesn't need specific functions. It's, well, maybe use matches, but that's the purpose of anyway. Going to the next one, the middleware. So Next.js does have a middleware. Remix doesn't. I mean, not out of the box, because you can create a custom Express server, and I think you can create a custom middleware. But let me show you what happens if you need middleware on Next. They have a middleware.ts file where you receive the request, and you can do multiple things here. In my specific use case, I need this X URL because on actions, I'm gonna go to a specific action. Let me think. Actions on this, like for example, for the action toggle scheme, you know that I have a previous state and the form data. But what if I want to use, like for example, the current route slug? Like for example, if I'm on a blog post and I have an ID, I want to be able to have that blog ID that comes from the params from the current URL and grab the blog ID variable. So in actions, there's no way to manually use this, because unless you pass it down on the form data, and I'm not sure if you can pass down on the previous state. I guess you can, but I don't find that to be a best practice because the client is sending that. I need to be able to catch whatever I need from the server and put it on my action. So for that reason, on the middleware, I create this X URL that is called on every loader and on every action. And I also need the tenant slug, the example from the blogs. It's actually on a real world case that I need the tenant ID that comes from this group. So these brackets tenant, it's a parameter from the URL. So I need to use that on the actions. So on Next, I override the default headers and put that there. On Remix, since there's no out-of-the-box middleware, what I do is on every action and on every loader, I need to have this either require auth, where is it? Did I write it wrong? Require auth. So you can see that, for example, for subscribing a tenant, I'm calling this on the loader, passing down the request and the params. And I do the same thing where I need to manually check that the current user belongs to this specific tenant. And you can see my function that if it's on the admin route, it's gonna require the admin user. Otherwise, if it's on the app route, I'm gonna grab the tenant ID from that params, and I'm gonna check if it's a member and throw unauthorized if not. So this function should be in a middleware, but I manually call it on loaders and on actions. Like for example, for updating a profile, you can see that I check the profile loader, and then on the action, do the same thing as well. Now, for SvelteKit, they do have a middleware called hooks.server, and here's a simple handle. And I'm actually doing something similar to Next here, but not really, because you can see that I'm using the same thing that I use on Next, which is saving this XURL, but I never use it. I just set it and do the same thing for xTenantslog. Yeah, like that. Because the actions on SvelteKit do have actions. You can see that the actions do have the request, the cookies, and some other things like search, the params, and other things that you can need on the loader and on the actions itself. So there's no need for a middleware on my specific use case, but there's the option to do that on hooks.server.ts or JS. Because if you don't know, SvelteKit is pro JavaScript instead of pro TypeScript, because out of the box without TypeScript, you have those co-located types that I showed you. Where did I show you? I guess on the newsletter page, where this action, well, I'm typing the data here, but if I remove that, I still have that those types. So anyway, going to the next difference is the UI libraries, and I found that they're pretty much complete, because SvelteKit, it's Svelte, and Remix and Next.js are React. And of course, you all know about Tailwind CSS. The three of them support them, so there's no much difference between them. But if you want to use something like ShatCN, the greatest UI library, I guess, that uses Tailwind CSS, so it's like a great match. And if you want to use that on SvelteKit, you can with this unofficial package called ShatCN. Why can I write ShatCN.svelte? So this is an unofficial port of ShatCN, but they have all the components that I need on my application. You can see that it's basically an exact copy of ShatCN. For example, if you are looking for a button or a badge, here's the badge, and here's the badge on SvelteKit as well. So what if you want other things like headless UI, where they have things that sometimes ShatCN doesn't have, like a drop-down menu, a disclosure, a dialog, a popover. So this is highly maintained, and I'm not sure about this one, but there's also a headless UI for, I meant Svelte here, headless UI. And I'm using the dialogues that this library has. So this is basically the exact same way that you will do on React. Let me show you on here. If I have this transition, you can see that I'm using that on the sidebar layout and on the profile button. So this profile button, I'm gonna show you on the SvelteKit edition. This is with that transition, which is, well, there's a little bug, but this is because of this input selector. But you can see that it's being transitioned, like a little bit of animation, and this comes from this specific library, which is great. So there's not much difference between them. Now, deployment. This specific application I have deployed to to Vercel and to Fly. So there are two different deployment types, which is a VPS, a virtual private server that uses a Docker file, and on Vercel they are serverless functions. So let me show you. If I go to Rockstack, slash starting with Next, I have that version on Fly. and this deployment is right here, rockstack Next.js. So here we can configure the machines. I can upgrade the machine size. This is a pretty small machine because this is a demo and this is the RAM. So this is a BPS, and I have the same thing for the Remix one and the SvelteKit one. So you can see that this is running on a BPS and it's working correctly. And do the same thing for Remix. It's on fly. And well, the SvelteKit edition, I haven't deployed that because I haven't finished the SaaS boilerplate that I'm building. But I wanted to have something that I can deploy. And I was able to with this Docker file. So this Docker file is the one that is used for deploying a container. And if you're looking to deploy to I will say a cheaper option, quote unquote, for building quickly an MVP, you can use Vercel, rockstack .next, Vercel. And the downside of using Vercel as a serverless functions is that if you're gonna use Prisma, which I am, the Prisma client is fat, especially if you have a big Prisma schema. It's gonna affect the call starts. Otherwise, it's great because you have a URL for every deployment that you make, and that's like the greatest idea ever. And I have the same thing for Remix, Vercel, and I think I failed this deployment. But you can see that I have a specific branch that I called Prisma with Torso, and this Prisma with Torso, it's pretty fast because Torso, it's, if you don't know what it is, it's a database for SQLite for production. So it's pretty fast. And yeah, the SvelteKit one is right here, Vercel.app, and it's the same thing that I have here on the flag one. So my point here is that I showed you that Next.js, Remix, and SvelteKit provides a Docker file, or you can create a custom one to deploy to any BPS. And if you don't want to use a BPS or a container, you can just deploy to Vercel or to render, what was it called? Railway and Render and DigitalOcean or any other provider that allows you to connect the GitHub repo, and for every commit, make a deployment. So going to the next one is the syntax. So Next.js and Remix, it's exactly the same syntax because it uses React. But the main difference that I found with Svelte versus React, I actually have it typed down here because that's a little bit more complex. So there will be an article on these topics that I'm talking about on this video. And here I have a syntax here. For example, on React, you have this way of rendering UI where you have truthy values, and you can use these ampersand operands to render a specific value if this is true, and do the same thing for else if, and for each you can do exactly as you would expect on JavaScript, which is items.map, and then grabbing the item and the index and put that on as a key. And on SvelteKit, specific talking about the for each, you need to pass down the index with comma separated. And if you want this to be the equivalent of having a key here, so Svelte isn't smart enough to identify that, you can pass in parentheses the key. But you can see that this is basically a template syntax. So this is no longer JavaScript. You need to use these if directives or else directives or else if, and close those tags with diagonal or slash if, and do the same thing for each. And I can't remember another directive, but this is the most simpler way. The only downside that I found on SvelteKit in terms of syntax is that when I was migrating, for example, this specific table, I already built a custom table on React that you can see here on accounts. And this table I'm constructioning like this. You can see that on this tenants table, I call my component that I built called tenant simple. I mean table simple, where I pass down the items and the headers or columns. I construct that on a use effect because this has logic. For example, let me show you. There's an if somewhere here. Yeah, if tenant invoices, no, it's not here. Well, anyway, my point is that on these headers, I can pass down components. I mean, dynamic components. And there's no easy way of doing that. I mean, construction UI on this way. So what I did on SvelteKit, you can see on accounts page. Where is it? Let me go to admin page and see the dashboard. Yeah, I have it on the dashboard. So on the page, I have this tenants table, and on this tenants table, I'm using the SHA-2 and Svelte unofficial port to manually construct this table. Because if I want to use table simple, I will need to do something like this, and it's not supported. Like items equals to title, let's say tenant, and the value, it's gonna be like item dot name. I'm gonna import this and see if this works. I need the headers. Yeah, no, this should be the headers, and the items. I can have the items like having a name, sample, and I can use this variable here. So if it's a simple value like a string, you can see that it works. But whenever you want to add styles or buttons like this is the main difference that I found from React to Svelte. So I need to manually find another way of constructing tables like this. But it's no big deal because I'm not actually calling table multiple times. You can see, well, I am. 23 results. Yeah, for example, this one. I'm passing down the rows that are missing, and I'm rendering the headers or the columns with this value function. And in this case, I'm not rendering a specific UI, but let's take a look at another one. Yeah, like here. On this specific key column, I want to be able to truncate and set the max width of extra small. But I need to find that or construct another component that does that using slots. So for the next one is error boundaries. On Next, they have an error handler. So if I put that inside the app, this is the default way of catching the global errors, where you receive an error and a status and a message and I guess this is like a stack trace. I'm not sure. And depending on the status of the error, I'm gonna render, for example, a custom page 404 or a custom unauthorized page. Otherwise, I'm just gonna return this error title and a button to try again or to go back to the previous page. It should be somewhere here. Yeah, anyway. And on Remix, it's basically something similar, but there's no actual error file. You need to export on the page that you want to use not a default, export error boundary function like this. And let's take a look at the contact page. And on this, I built a server error component that I do the same thing on Next, where I listen to the status. Otherwise, I just render the default error. And on SvelteKit, it's similar to Next, where you have a specific error page, and here you have the page error that comes from this page from app stores. If you don't know, this page contains multiple things like page, URL, and the search params. And if you want to set something like here, and if you want to update the URL, you go to the updated URL. So this page object contains a ton of value because on Remix you will need to do something like search params, use search params, and if you want to set search params, change it like this, and this will update the URL. And on Next you will have something like this, where, well, I'm gonna go to the next code base so you can see more easy. If I want to update the params, let me see. I'm using this use search params. I'm constructing a URL search params object, and I need router and path name. So these two, because whenever I change the search, I need to router replace the current path name with the new search params. So this is, I don't like the Next.js way because you need to import all of this if you want to update. I guess there's a simpler way, but if that's the case, I didn't find it. But anyway, now the developer experience, and this is basically the same thing. Developer experience and learning curve, they're like tied. So I found that they're all three great frameworks. I mean, you can do magic with them because they're all full stack. So you have clear ways of loading data, specifying the meta tags like title for SEO purposes. The actions on the three of them I really like. I guess I'm actually liking the three ways of managing actions. And rendering client or server components, I don't see it as a downside for the next case that you have to use server and use client. At the beginning I didn't like that, but since I found that they support like use action state, that hook is like the savior of my Next.js experience, because there you receive the action data and a specific action that you can call and pass down the form, and then having a pending status. So each framework has its advantages, but I honestly will put Remix at the top, and then Next, and then SvelteKit. So yeah, why Remix? I guess because of the full stack routes. I come from an .NET background where I needed to manage the client application and the server application as separate. So when I found this Remix way of having on a specific file the route, the parameters, the use search params, the actions, the client component, reactive data, reactive action data, and then being able to call previous parent routes with use matches without the need of a context. Yeah, that's why I'm still loving Remix more than Next and Svelte. But I'm truly biased because I've been working on Remix for the past 2.5 years. I have a Remix production template that is commercial. I don't have anything commercial just yet as of today. That changes tomorrow for Next and SvelteKit. But yeah, I'm definitely biased. And as a closing note, I wanted to talk about that. It surprised me that you cannot redirect inside in Next inside a try and catch. So I need to use this is redirect error whenever I know that inside a try you like for example here, updating the create user session redirects with the new cookies. So I need to manually check that. Otherwise, you have that next redirect error. And I think that's the same case for SvelteKit is redirect. Yeah, that's the same case. They both have a function that knows whether their error is a redirect, so you can rethrow it instead of failing, because failing is not the same thing as a redirect response. And reactivity on SvelteKit, for example, let me take a look at the root data that I talked about. I need to add this $sign if I want to make something truly reactive. I'm not sure how it works under the hood, but whenever I'm not using root data, well, in the first place, since this is a writable object that I manually constructed on the root data here, like on this that comes from Svelte store, and I construct that on the root data context provider, like here, set context, because this is a writable. But you can have other things like count 0, and if you have something like result, which comes from count times 2, this is reactive, but this is also reactive. The count is also reactive, but I guess this $sign is whenever you wanna well, I guess a specific use case that I found is on plan. I had these functions, for example, get currency symbol, that use a property that comes from a parent component like currency. You can see currency is an export of type string. So I had this like this function. Well, I guess like this, const equals to that. But whenever the parent updated the currency, it didn't update this function value, but that was fixed by adding the $sign. So yeah, that's the top differences that I found. Of course, this is not an application that covers all types of applications like e-commerce and blogs. I mean, this is a SaaS application, and more specifically, a B2B SaaS boilerplate. So, of course, I don't have a truly dynamic client application where I need to render, I don't know, something like React Flow or be truly reactive. So, but if you're like me and you needed something to as a starting point to compare the three of them, these are the top differences that I found. So if you liked the video, comment down below, and if you want to see another comparison video, I can do the same that I did here for databases like Supabase versus PlanetScale versus Turso with SQLite. So that's Postgres versus MySQL versus SQLite. But anyway, thanks for watching, and if you don't know, tomorrow I will be launching Rockstack.dev. So you can go to producthunt.com, create an account, and click notify me so you upvote it and support me through the launch. So anyway, thanks for watching.